Okay. Today, my guest is Professor Noel Capon. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Noel as a person, Professor Capon is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally is a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Capon is Professor of International Marketing at Columbia Business School. He's an expert in international marketing, competitive strategy, and Chinese businesses. He has published more than 80 articles and book chapters and more than 40 books. The local versions of his books have been published in Asia Pacific, Brazil, China, Russia, Spanish Latin America, Western Europe, and the Middle East. He received the Jerome Chazin and George Robbins Awards for teaching international business at Columbia and UCLA. He also wrote a poetry book, Life and Death and Odyssey, which is, I hope we can talk about that one, which received 2 prizes. In addition to academic publications, he has developed a number of teaching notes and case studies. Thank you, Noel, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So let's start with the poetry book. How did you write that? What's it all about?
The poetry book, that's somewhat of a long story. The basic issue is that my wife's great aunt was married to an NBC journalist, and he worked for NBC in Japan. And after the war, he was, I guess, working for the U.S. government, but he was sent to Hiroshima to set up the radio station in Hiroshima. And when he was about to leave, which is, I guess, around 1946, something like that, to return to the U.S., one of the people who worked for the radio station gave him this sort of school kids sort of blue book with some material in it. Now, when the great aunt died in now I guess 15, 20 years ago, my wife and I had we were the closest, geographically closest living relatives to where she lived on Long Island, in Port Washington, on Long Island, New York. We had the job of sort of taking down the house and so forth. My wife spent time with the crockery and the any valuables that we found, and I was sent to the attic. And when I was going through the attic, I found this book which had Hiroshima on it, this little school kids book, and I sort of threw that in my bag and looked at it sometime later, and it was in effect, it was a letter written by this person who worked for the Hiroshima radio station that he'd given to my wife's great aunt's husband. And what it was, it described his experience in the day and the 2 or 3 days after the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. He was in Hiroshima. I guess he was hidden. The person who wrote the book was in Hiroshima when the bomb dropped. I guess was hiding behind a wall or something, and he wrote what he experienced that day and the next 2 or 3 days as he went around Hiroshima on his bicycle, seeing what went on. So I took that document and sort of turned it into a poem, and got that published in a local magazine in around New York City.
Perfect, thank you. Noel, what did you want to become when you were a child?
I don't really have any good memory of that. Often kids want to be a policeman or a fireman or something, that sort of profession, because those are the sort of authority figures they see around. I didn't really have any of that, but I do remember in my early teens, sort of family members, uncles, aunts talking about I ought to be a teacher. But I don't remember anything that I personally generated.
And where did you grow up?
Yeah, I was just growing up. I was focused on the present rather than the future. But I guess that was an idea I had in my head, was put in my head pretty early on.
No, where did you grow up? Are we
Oh,
talking
where
about...
did I grow up? I grew up in Southampton, in England, which is the major England's major passenger port. It's on the south coast of England, opposite France.
And how did you come to the US, and how did you decide to pursue a career in academia?
Okay, well, I first came to the US in when I graduated my undergraduate college in London, and in fact, I traveled across to the west coast to San Francisco, and then came in a drive-away car. There was a system at the time where the U.S. automakers hired agency. There was an agency in Detroit, and the agency's job was to get new automobiles, elsewhere in the States. So I had linked up with this agency in Detroit and driven, I guess must have been a 1960 Chevrolet across to Spokane, stayed on the West Coast a few days, and then went back and spent the summer in Toronto. So I'd had this idea of coming to the state, visiting the US for a long time. And then after a short career as a marketing executive, applied to and went to Manchester Business School in its second year of operation. Did fairly well there, and at the time, the British government had grants. It was an organization called the Foundation for Management Education. I think they funded both London and Manchester business schools, and I earned a scholarship to. I went to Harvard. Did the second year of the Harvard MBA program. By that time, I decided I did not want to be an executive. I didn't like the sort of bureaucracy that I found at the company I worked at in England, and so applied for PhD programs and was accepted at Columbia. And I joined Columbia in the marketing division as a PhD student in 1969.
Okay, and something that is not on your CV that people might find interesting about you.
Oh, a couple of things, I guess. One is that I'd always been running as a major sport in high school. Then I had some leg injuries, but I went back to running in my early 40s, and did a sub 3-hour marathon, which I was very pleased about. I guess that's one issue. The second issue would probably be that my wife is a very famous or very well accomplished, well recognized developmental psychologist, but she used a different name, so most people don't know that.
Okay, thank you. If you could do it all over again, would you change anything, or what's the second best career path for you?
No, I would not. I'm very, very happy with the career path I in effect stumbled into, and very happy with with doing the research I do and the teaching I do. So no, I'm extremely happy with the sort of career path that turned out. It didn't start out so smoothly, but I got it worked into.
The part that didn't work out smoothly was the marketing executive portion or academically the scholarship?
It's really academic. It really goes back to the sort of difference between the British education system and a more liberal education system as they have in the United States. In Britain, as a child, you get channeled very, very early. So, there's the 11+ examination to see if you're likely to flourish with your mind or with your hands, and you go to different schools. I passed that exam. And then when you get into the grammar school, you take these set of exams, the O-level exams, the ordinary level GCE exams, with a fair number of subjects. But then if you stay on school, after 16, you specialize. So after 16, my school studies were just chemistry, physics, pure mathematics, and applied mathematics. So you get channeled very early, and then at the university level, you apply to a department rather than university. So I applied to chemistry departments. I'd sort of got some idea I wanted to do that, work in that field. So you end up leaving high school having pretty good knowledge in the subjects that you take, but you don't have this sort of broader sort of liberal education. So that's what I wish I had, but certainly in England at the time, that didn't exist.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's talk about research a bit. What do you explain, or how do you explain your research to people who don't read scholarly journals, and why your research is important to the regular layman?
Okay, so I guess what I would say about that is my main research thrust has been in marketing, and what marketing is about ultimately is about securing, we're in a capitalist system where we have companies, and the way that companies survive and grow is by serving customers. So that's and marketing is the heart of that. So that's essentially why I ended up going into marketing. But that in addition, that sort of broad thrust. But then also there's been an issue of opportunism. If I came across an area that I found interesting, I did work on that. So one example of that would be the area of credit scoring in granting credit, and the tension between what credit bureaus do and what credit scoring companies do. I got very interested in that in the mid-late 70s when I was at UCLA. And wrote a couple of papers about that. Had some impact, I think, on legislation. I testified before the US Senate, had a couple of op-eds published in the Times, New York Times, and the Washington Post. So that was sort of an opportunistic thing, but basically it's been to do with in some form or other serving customers. And that's sort of what's taken me also into some work in the international business field.
About IB, things that you see, things that have been omitted from the IB research, things that we should have done more of, things that have been neglected in the area. What do you
Okay,
think?
I think one that's been neglected is a focus on customers, especially in B2B, where the firm is customers or other firms, other organizations. I think the focus has tended to be on with respect to international business. Should we enter a country market? If so, how do we enter it? Do we do it by export, or do we do it by setting up operations? Do we do a de novo entry? Do we, or do by ourselves, or do we have joint venture partners or strategic alliances? That sort of thing. There's been much less focus on the customers, and I think that's a major problem. So we have, I think, for many B2B companies, many large B2B companies who service customers, who have customers around the world, their organization structures are not linked to their organization structures do not follow their strategy. A basic principle of management is that structure follows strategy. That, in fact, has not occurred, and I think it's not occurred because there's been a lack of focus on the firm's current and potential customers.
Let's expand on this one. You're talking about business-to-business organizations, some intermediate goods,
Right.
not consumer-oriented products. We're talking about hidden champions or the Shinesi type of
What I'm
company.
talking is the following. The initial work here was done by Ray Vernon at Harvard in the late 1960s. Ray Vernon, Lewis Wells, they have a book. You've got to really go back to the end of the Second World War, when the European industrial infrastructure was in pretty bad shape, because of the war, whereas the United States industrial infrastructure was in pretty good shape. There'd be no war issues in the United States, in the main 48 states. The only one which is obviously very serious was Pearl Harbor, but the industrial infrastructure was in pretty good shape. And what American companies saw was a tremendous opportunity in Europe. In 1968, Jean-Jacques Servan-Schreiber, a European Frenchman, I believe French, wrote the American Challenge, the Défi Américain, in which he was concerned about the success that American companies had in Europe. And this was for a potential problem for European companies. Around that time, Ray Vernon at Harvard embarked on a research program to figure out how American companies have been so successful. And they focused on the organization structures. What structures had American companies used to be successful in Europe? Now, they looked at all sorts of companies, but in terms of B2B, they came up with, I think, three major organization structures. The first was export. Firms formed export divisions to export products into Europe. The second was an international division, and IBM was the sort of poster child for this. IBM, in addition to domestic US IBM then set up semi-independent subsidiaries in various countries: IBM Germany, IBM Britain, IBM Japan, IBM France, and so forth, overseen by an organization called IBM World Trade, to which these various country organizations reported. that organization then morphed into what was termed a geographic area structure, where the initial ones were typically the US would be one region because it was so big. Then there were a second would be in effect the rest of the Americas, Latin America and the Caribbean. A third would be Europe, Middle East, and Africa, often called EMEA. And then the fourth would be Asia, or typically Asia Pacific, because Australia and New Zealand were often incorporated into Asia. And then later, those organizations went down to three, typically, as the US became less dominant as a revenue generator. It got morphed into into the Americas. So in many companies today, you have three major geographic divisions run by very senior, very powerful regional vice presidents. The Americas, EMEA, and then Asia Pacific.
Is that the current setup in the current modern organization?
I see. I think there needs to be more research on it. I talked to a fair number of international executives, and that seems to me fairly common.
Okay. About the PhD experience, the program experience, you've seen hundreds of students, you've seen hundreds of junior faculty. Across young scholars, what are some of the common mistakes that you see that is repeatedly appearing?
Okay, let me get a bit. Maybe I should finish the point I was just talking about. So that's the structure. The structure I see. So what companies are doing are figuring out how to operate in France and how to operate in Germany and so forth, or how to operate in Japan, but different countries. But the problem is in B2B, the customers do not necessarily make their decisions country by country. They make their decisions globally. And as we know, there's been a lot of improvement in the way in procurement practice in the last 10, 15 years. So that customer companies, they don't want to make 20 different contracts with a supplier when in each country. They want to make one global contract. They want to do things like making sure the product they buy, the supply they buy from Belgium is the same as the product they buy from Japan, so they can automate things in their own company. So the way B2B companies are tending to look at the world is they want to integrate what they're doing across countries, where supplier structures are often set up so they deal country by country. And that's what I mean with where there's a problem. Now, there are some recent changes. IBM has got a different system now, so does Cisco, that are trying to deal with this sort of mismatch between the regional organization that the supplier has and the more integrated sets of decisions that the customer wants. What you often hear from customer companies is, I want one point of contact. I want someone within my supplier I can talk to. But the way the supplier is set up is that they have 20 different people, an account manager in each country. So there's a mismatch between strategy and structure. And I think that's an area where there's been a much less work than there needs to have been done. But now your question was about PhD.
About the PhD students, about the advice part, we'll come back to it. But based on, let me follow up on what you just explained about structure, conduct, performance. Yes, there are companies like that, but there are also companies that are doing just opposite, right? Right now, I'm thinking of electrical commodities, electrical products like Schneider versus Bosch. The Bosch company is exactly what you're explaining, but Schneider has switched to a more flexible, more compartmentalized, maybe modular design, and they are more flexible across the world, right? You can't find examples for both sides of that argument.
I think that's right. I think there's an evolution, but I think there's a company. I mean, no, the companies that manage a geographic region structure, and there are other ways to solve the problem, but companies, I hear an awful lot from customer companies that say, I want a single point of contact. I want one person I can deal with who can give me answers across the world from the from the supplier. And that's why you have this field of global account management, or global account managers who are responsible for one customer around the world, and have sort of built those people into an organization structure that sort of fits that strategy.
Right.
No, I'm sure they're right across the board. There are companies in all phases of those sorts of relationships, but I think that's one where we've seen somewhat less work. One of your questions was, do the omitted variables? I think that's an omitted variable.
That's right. Thank you. About the advice mentoring part, common mistakes that you see across the board for juniors.
What I say, let me turn that around and say what I think a junior faculty or doctoral student should do is one is find the right advisor, find someone who's really doing good research, and then work very hard for that advisor. Take the goal that as the assistant, you're trying to make that advisor successful and make that research be successful. And what that will turn into is where you start off with the faculty member, your advisor's ideas, but if you work hard and do a good job, and learn about the topics and the problems, that's what will evolve, is a system where you are coming up with the ideas for the advisor, and then you and the advisor become successful together. Well, that will give you both a start in your career, but also give you a lot of support from that advisor who you have worked very hard for. So I think one is you just got to work hard. Pick the right advisor, which may be not so easy, but then work hard for that advisor, and understand what the rules of the game are. I mean, the rules of the game are for doctoral students and young faculty are to publish, to do interesting work that other people want to read. That will be both fulfilling in of itself, will help your advisor, and also start to develop a reputation that you can then use to advance either within your school or university, or you move to another school or university, that sort of thing.
All right, who was your advisor?
I had various advisors going through. I think the first advisor was a guy called Ken Simmons. Simmons was a New Zealander. he got his PhD at University of Indiana. And he was when Manchester Business School opened in 1967, I think it was, he was hired as the marketing professor. It was a small school, so there was only one. And he was very influential in helping me get into earn this Foundation for Management Education grant to go to Harvard. The second person, there were sort of three of them. They were then my advisors at Columbia. So John Howard was chair of the division, but then my major advisors were John Farley, who had been hired by Columbia from Carnegie Mellon, and a guy called Mac Holbert, who was also another Englishman. He was hired on actually was hired on the faculty the same year that I joined as a doctoral student. And I did a lot of work and had books and papers with both Farley and with Holbert.
Can you remember the best advice they gave you?
Frankly, no, just a lot of encouragement to I think it wasn't never given to me directly, but just observing John Farley, and just in seminars that we would be there would be a marketing seminar, it would be a visiting scholar or maybe a doctoral student who was looking for a job, interviewing for a job. And the seminar would proceed, the speaker would say things, there would be questions and so forth. And then Farley would ask a question which would be right out of the blue. It seemed to have nothing whatever to do with what the speaker was talking about at a superficial level, but was a much deeper question. And so he had this ability to sort of get under the surface of the topic and ask more fundamental and interesting questions. And I think so in that sense, I would say, not that he told me anything, but just in terms of observing the way he operated, I found that, I think that was quite influential on me. And it sort of led me to then take on these topics, which were sort of opportunistic, if you like, may have not been in the normal course of event, like the credit scoring work I mentioned just now.
Do you find yourself repeating what you have seen and observed from your advisors with your students or with the guest speakers that come to your school? Or
oh, certainly I try to do that, to look more deeply at questions and try to come up with questions, research questions and things which may not be common. Yeah, I think the work I just talked about, the organization structure for global companies as they concerns their customers. I don't think I've seen that before, but I've been mulling around that for quite a while. That sort of come to the surface.
Thank you. For the sake of time, last question. What's the question that I should have asked you but haven't?
A question you should have asked me about. A question you
what's the question I should have asked you but haven't?
Oh, but have not. I don't know. We've covered a pretty broad sense of personal and professional. And you could have asked me of what's the best work I think I've done or something like that. And I'm not
Okay.
quite sure what my answer to that would be, because I've worked in a number of areas. You might ask me where I see international business going.
Let's talk about that one. Where is IB going?
Okay. Well, I think there are, there are a set of very interesting questions. So I was at a seminar yesterday, and at Columbia Business School, and one of the speakers was a young woman. She was an assistant professor in finance. That's less important than the fact that she's also Ukrainian, I guess Ukrainian American, but her hometown is, she said, is just 10 miles away from Bakhmut, where there's been all this fighting over the past few weeks. And after the seminar, I asked the question, which has been on my mind: what should be Columbia's or any American university's position on admitting students from Russia? Clearly Russia is the bête noire of the US right now. Should US institutions, higher education institutions, admit Russian students? So we had somewhat of a conversation about that, and what she said was that the major view would be, certainly in Ukraine, absolutely not. We don't want anything to do with Russia. Russia's invaded us, nothing will have to do with Russia. But she said she didn't have that view, that if bright Russian students were enabled to get out of Russia, they could add to there would be less bright people in Russia on the one hand, and also that would be of benefit to the US, as so many immigrants have benefited of the US. So I think the translation that's a sort of international business thing, but the translation to international business is how do companies start to think about the countries in which they're going to do business? Do they take a sort of short-term view on the way things are now, or do they take a longer-term view on what might be an appropriate decision for some future which is yet undefined? I'm thinking of if anyone had spoken to certainly an English person, and maybe others on the continent, of whether or not they would have wanted to do in 1946, of whether they'd want to do business in Germany. The answer certainly would have been no. And now Germany is, of course, evolved. It's one of the US's major allies in Europe. So I think there are going to be a set of decisions that companies are going to have to make about who they do business with, where they do business. They take a short-term view, or they take a longer-term view, which may be not popular at the moment. So I think there are a whole set of questions about where internationally firms do business that are perhaps more pertinent today than they have been for the last 20 or 30 years.
Thank you. Noel, this was very informative. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you for the invitation.